Hello, Asperx or Asperx. This is a power bank and it's 65 watts. Now it's 65 watts charge and also 65 watts discharge. Now that's better than my previous favourite power bank, which is this one, which is 60 watts discharge, but you could only charge this one at 30 watts. Also, this one just has these four rather dim blue LEDs to tell you state of charge, whereas the Asperx one has a display on it which has state of charge, but also, in fact you can see it better on the box, these two watt indicators for power going out and or power coming in. In fact, I think it's one at a time. I'm not sure that this lets you do pass-through. In the box we have a couple of manuals. I think the thick one is multi-language and this one is English only. Also this cable, which is quite interesting, and I'll come back to this because it is a 65 watt cable. So here, is it possible to charge other devices while charging the battery pack? No, it'll cause detrimental effects on the lifespan of the battery pack, so you can't charge it and discharge it at the same time. So as well as the display on the front, which times out after a few seconds, we also have these connectors, Type-C in and out, which has an orange plastic piece, and Type-C out only, this one here, and also Type-A output. Now this has quick charge 2, quick charge 3, and of course the Type-Cs have PD, power delivery. Now what's the deal with this 65 watt cable? Well, if we put it into a USB tester and we go down to E marker, so I'll put this into the E marker tester. So connect it to this tester and you can see that it has the E marker chip. So it says it's a USB 2 speed cable, length is 1 to 2 meters, 20 volts maximum voltage and current 5 amps. But because this thing has 65 watts clearly embossed on it, I would imagine it's not actually rated, the cable itself is not rated for 5 amps. So in other words, only use this cable with this Asperx power bank. So let's test the 65 watt charging. I've connected the power bank using a 5 amp E marker cable to a 100 watt PD output power bank. Let's turn that on and we can see that the input power ramps up to 63 watts. 62 watts. Now this says 65 watts. And the power bank that I'm using with this 100 watt PD output is saying 61 watts. So they're all largely in agreement. So yes, this power bank will charge at 62, 63 watts. Now if you use a 3 amp cable, which I'll do actually, I'll plug one in now. So here, using a 3 amp USB Type-C cable, of course it's limited to 3 amps, so it's only charging at 57 watts. Now here's the thing, if you charge this at 65 watts, it gets quite warm. And it seems that it has temperature sensing inside this thing, and when it gets to a certain temperature, it will reduce that 65 watts to about 33 watts. I noticed. So I'm just going to make a list of how it charged as I observed it. So from 0% to about 40%, it charged at 65 watts. But by the time it got to 40%, it was very warm. And so from 40% to 70% approximately, it reduced the charge rate to 33 watts. Now, if you stop charging and let it cool down, so I put it in a cool room in the house, it would actually charge at 65 watts all the way up to 70%. But of course, the unit needs to be cool in order for that to happen. Now, when you get to 70%, another thing takes over from the temperature regulation, this goes into constant voltage mode, and therefore the current starts tapering off. So of course the power starts tapering off. The numbers I saw were approximately between 70% and 80% 20 watts, 10 watts between 80% and 90%, and these numbers were sort of reducing all the time. These are averages. Between 90% and 100%, it was down to about 5 watts. So it does charge at 65 watts. If you can keep it very cool, you can get that power level right up to 70%. Then, of course, the reducing current takes over and the power levels drop down. Now, the only thing that I could find to allow this to discharge at 65 watts was to put it into the input of this All Powers power bank. So let's do that. And so there it is. Now it says here 61%. Interesting, on the All Powers it actually says 69%, so that's probably reading a bit wrong. But yes, connected to that device I can actually get 60-ish watts coming out of the Asperx. Now you'll notice that it says on here it's a 20,000 milliamp hour power bank. Now that's an equivalent, because it appears that this device is 4 NMC cells in series. That's 14.8 volts, 5 amp hours at that voltage. So that is equivalent to 20,000 milliamp hours at 3.7 volts. And the 3.7 volts gives us a clue that this is NMC rather than lithium iron phosphate. The way this thing gives you 65 watts is that at 20 volts it can do 3.25 amps, so a little bit above the 3 amps at 20 volts, but you are limited to 3 amps at 15, so that's 45 watts, 3 amps at 12, so that's 36 watts, 3 amps at 9 volts, so that's 3 nines are 27 watts, and also 3 amps at 5 volts, so that's 15 watts if this thing is outputting 5 volts. Now there's lots of stuff in the manual about using multiple output ports. If you use a single type C, 65 watts max, the other one of course is the same. If you use just the type A, you get 20 watts max. But if you use combinations, then the converter, the voltage converter, always defaults to 5 volts. Because it doesn't want to run the risk of 2 different devices requiring 2 different voltages. So it immediately reverts to 5 volts at 4.5 amps total between the combined sockets, and that is 22.5 watts. And that's the case whether you're using 2 type Cs, you're limited to 22.5 watts, or a type A plus a type C, or the type A and the other type C. You're limited in all cases where you're using multiple outputs to 22.5 watts. So that is the Asperx 65 watt power bank with very nice display. It can do 65 watts. You can charge it at 65 watts, but do bear in mind that there are temperature related effects. In fact, I've got a feeling the manual says, yes, it says here it is recommended to use a 30 watt charger to charge, and I would imagine that recommendation is because a 30 watt charger will not hit the temperature limit, so it will charge at 30 watts all the way up to 70% and then taper off as it moves up towards 100%. So yes, 65 watts, but bear in mind that temperature limitation, bear in mind that limitation when you're charging between 70% and 100%, and also bear in mind the limitations if you're using multiple outputs at the same time, when the unit always puts out 5 volts, and therefore of course you're limited to 22.5 watts. But if you want bursts of power at 65 watts, then this device can do it. The Asperx AX2065. Cheerio!